Let's get things underway. I'm going to bring up Doug Austin, the CEO of Strategic Source, for a few opening comments before we bring on our guest presenter. So just a moment here, Doug, and then it's all yours.
You joined us today. We've got the distinct pleasure of having Andy Church, president of DSMA, with us. He's going to speak on the topic of understanding automotive buy-sell, best practices and fundamentals. So we're glad to have him with us. Just by way of background, the Innovative Supplier series of webinars began in June of this year. This is about the 13th or maybe 14th webinar that we've done. If you're interested in any of the other previous topics, you can find those on our website. And we can make this presentation available to you again at the end of this session today. We initiated this webinar series primarily to provide innovative ideas on expense categories, audit categories, and revenue categories. This is an ideal consulting category as well, given all the activity in the buy-sell market and dealership. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy and let him take it away. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Doug. Much appreciated. Appreciate everybody being here and taking the time today to spend some time, an hour with us or so, to really talk about some interesting information in a little different format. You know, webinars are one of those. I'm usually an interactive guy in front of a crowd, so I like the webinar format with the questions and answers as well. So, Doug, thank you very much for allowing me to do this, and I hope you get some great information out of today. So we'll have some questions and some polls throughout as well, and try to just have some fun as we go and learn some stuff, right? So just talking a little bit about the webinar series, I think Doug has touched on most of that in the categories that we've looked at and how to get access to the older ones. Today, we're going to talk about some concepts of normalization and goodwill, what that looks like from a business perspective. So not just the buy-sell world, but also the valuation of your, which often is the most valuable family asset, a dealership or a group of dealerships. So we're going to talk through that. We're going to talk about some best practices if you're on the buyer side of the table or if you're on the seller side of the table. And then we're also going to look at some trends that are emerging and topics and questions that I get asked every single day and my team gets asked every single day in our journeys throughout what's happening in today. First, just a little bit about myself. My name is Andy Church. I've been working in the automotive industry for about 25 years now, long career, spent a lot of time in my life in training, consulting, and always had a passion for dealers. So that's where I've spent my time. So everything from running 20 groups and profit forums to helping OEMs and dealers understand how to increase the value of that asset. That's where it is. My natural life led me to this job, and luckily enough, I've been able to do this and work with a great team of people at DSMA for the last 3 years and hopefully for the next 20 years as it continues to grow. So a little bit of introduction to who we are. We're a mergers and acquisitions firm in North America. I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like as well. We also handle, obviously, some of our transactions. We end up in a real estate type perspective as well. So we've got expertise in that area and abilities as well. We've got about 30 plus people now, actually. We're a growing company. We've grown a lot. We've doubled in size over the last 2 years. We're continuing to grow our business. But we're very proud because, like everything else, this is a people business, right? That's really what this ends up being. So we're proud of the team that we've assembled. As you can see here, we've got ex-dealers. So these are people that we sold their dealership and they've taken some time off maybe or immediately said, hey, I like the experience. I like the process. I'd like to join your firm. So we've been very fortunate to be able to do that and have a lot of representation there. We've got a lot of people from the bank side of the industry. We have an in-house CPA firm. So when it comes to valuations, I'll talk more about that in a little bit. We've also got factory employees, people who've worked at various levels, all levels really of the factory side as well. So understanding that really all this says is we speak your language, right? We're automotive people coming from an automotive background to be able to service our clients in the best way possible. Locations throughout the US, Canada, and even in Europe. So we do have what we call global reach. So we're able to do transactions anywhere and everywhere with a local understanding. So we've got local representation, the places where you can see the flags, and we continue to add to that to really understand the individual markets and the expertise in those individual markets. So I think that's always important. If you're going to trust somebody with your most valuable asset, you want to make sure that A, they've got the credibility, but B, they've got the team behind them. A little bit about our company and what we've done. So over the last 9 years, we've completed over 1,100 valuations. And so valuations becomes a lot of our bread and butter. Over 290 transactions, successful transactions, and over 1,000 years expertise on the team. So we've done that, generated billions in revenue. So we're constantly doing transactions all the time. That means that we're able to keep our finger on the pulse of the industry and what's really happening and understanding the drivers behind those transactions and how to deliver the best value to our clients. All right, let's get into the meat. So we're going to talk first a little bit about goodwill valuations and what we call profit normalization, right? We have a team of people in our organization that we call profit hunters. And really their job is to look at financial statements and look at businesses and understand what's happening in that business and what's the true maximum potential of that business. So that's what we're all talking about, right? Is how do I get the most value from my asset, whether I'm on the buyer side or on the seller side, because there's obviously a conversation that has to happen across those two for sure. We see, you can see this trend here of valuations as they come up. 2016, 2017, 2018, really started to see a boom in our valuation business and things continue to come up. It's important to know the value of your asset, even if you're not prepared to sell today. So even if you're not thinking of selling today, just like you may get an appraisal in your real estate, you should be getting a valuation on your business every 3 to 5 years to understand what are the impacts and what are the things that are happening in your business and to help you maximize that value when it comes time that you would actually like to exit. A little bit of dip in 2020, as you can see from COVID, as you'd expect. 2021, we're seeing it come up, and we expect 2022 to be an even higher number than 2019. So we expect it to be our best year ever from looking at that valuation side. Doug, we got a poll here. David, we got a poll here. So the poll is, what item has the biggest impact on how desirable a dealership is from a buyer perspective? So what do you think out of these 4 categories has the biggest impact on the profitability, on the valuation of a dealership? Is it profitability? Is it brand? Is it location? Or is it perhaps the facility itself? We'll let that answer for a couple more seconds. Okay, I think you can end there. Interesting. Very interesting. Nobody put facility. Nobody put facility as having the greatest impact. So very understandably, profitability first, brand next. Location won out at 44%, profitability at 31%, brand at 25%. Really good mix of those 3, no doubt about it. And I think you're all right. It really depends on the individual dealership and the individual particular opportunity that's there to have which one might have the biggest impact on that. So really good answers there. All right, so let's talk about when you're doing this, right, that assessment of profitability, brand, location, all those types of things. What are the types of things that you should be looking at? Because I promised to give you some best practices, things that you could take away to look at in your own stores. And here we go. So some key items that we review when we are looking at a value of a dealership and determining that is what are the year-end adjustments and what are the adjustments that happen to that P13 statement, for example, or the P12 statement. What are those impacts in profitability that are happening as we go? Obviously, other income has a big impact. How dependent are you as a dealership on either manufacturer OEM money, incentive plans, things like that? What are the implications? And are those payments sustainable? In addition to that, sometimes we even look at if your facility, back to that poll question about facility, if the current facility is not, let's say, CI compliant, is there money being left on the table there by someone possibly buying the store upgrading the facility and now being eligible for that additional incentive money. That ends up being a profit opportunity for a future buyer, right? So we look at the impact of that, and in particular, brands have different programs, so you need to understand what's happening there. And then I think an important part here too is the normalization. And what we mean by that is everybody knows in the statement income, there are some expenses that are either non-recurring or extraordinary or management compensation structure that could involve either, possibly family members and things like that, that may be having an impact on your expense structure that could actually be added back to the profitability because a new owner would not have to assume those additional expenses. So you want to understand all those different components, and that's one of the things that we look at from our side when we're looking at the valuation of a dealership on the asset side. Oh, there we go. The next thing is you gotta look at some information, right? You gotta get information from a few different areas. One of those obviously is the financial statements. That's a very important component of the entire process, is understanding that and knowing your financial statements and getting at least the last 3 years. There's been a lot of talk about what valuations look like today, and are we including 2021 or not? It really depends on the opportunity. We have seen several places where 2020 needs to be adjusted for the COVID impact possibly, and look at what impact that had on the business versus prior years. And then some people are also looking at 2021 saying, this is an anomaly year. How long can these profits continue? I don't know if anybody's looked at it, but the NADA average year to date right now is around 5.6% return on sales. I do a thing on LinkedIn every few months where I go over the NADA results. And if you look back 12 months ago, they were closer to 2.2 to 2.5 return on sales. Today, we're in the fives on a national average, luxury obviously being higher than that even. So that actually has an impact as well, right? Looking at that, comparing against composite reports and your peers, what is the opportunity, right? So market-driven type effects, depending upon whether you're in a metro location or a non-metro location, those can have an impact. So you want to be able to compare yourself against like opportunities and like dealerships. Same thing with market share, very important. Can you get a type of a report, whether it's a Polk report or some other type of market share report that shows that? Because obviously whether you're selling or buying, your current performance and market share is going to have an important impact on the value of the asset and the potential upside that we can grow that business into. Past profitability is important as well. And then real estate has a big impact. So that past profitability sometimes can be impacted by the real estate. But in addition to that, when you're looking at the real estate, you want to ask yourself some questions. Do I want to sell the property? If I'm on the seller side, do I want to sell the property or potentially lease the property and continue to own the property? Many of our clients own the property in a separate company. So therefore they make those decisions to do that. Not sure what's happening. My screen's going along. You also need to look at whether or not you want to do a lease with an option to purchase, for example. So if you are going to lease the building, would you look to do an exit strategy in the future or something like that as well? So two opportunities there. But I think here it's knowing where you are. So I would suggest, quite often we suggest to our clients, you get an appraisal of the property if it is something you're, and it's like the business valuation I talked about earlier. Every 3 to 5 years, you should be getting an appraisal of your property and evaluation of your business. And that's important so you know where you are. You can plan. I sometimes ask people all the time, do you think or do you know? And a lot of times if you think, that's not as good, right? So you don't want the surprises. You're trying to minimize surprises in any type of transaction. So if you can get some of that information together and do it on a normal basis, you can create your own trends and do your planning accordingly. That's very important. Some of the pros and cons there. Obviously, some of the pros of selling your real estate may be that you don't have to worry about that anymore, right? It's out there. You're out of the business completely. You don't have to worry about whether or not the existing business or the buyer, if they're leasing from you, goes out of business for whatever reason or whatever it may be. Some of the cons of that are you don't necessarily get to take the chips off the table immediately if you're leasing it out. You've got to wait longer duration to get your exit strategy out. So good opportunity there to have that conversation. But again, it starts with knowing what the value of your asset is so you can make those educated decisions. Let's talk a little bit more about qualitative versus quantitative, right? When we look at this, we're looking at, okay, and this is what we do on our inside, because we've done so many evaluations, we've got a comparison structure that we can go against. What does that look like, right? Where are the weighting? How are they producing against their composite? And how are they producing against other dealerships of that particular size, in that particular metro, of that particular brand? So we've got opportunities to do that. That's on a quantitative nature. On a qualitative nature, you've got a lot of things, right? What's the location? Who's the key management employees? Are they going to stay on through an exit or not? A lot of buyers want to see whether or not that's an opportunity. We all know, and if you read the headlines today, obviously, right? People are tough to find right now. And that's sometimes the struggle on whether or not an acquisition should happen, is whether or not we can actually find the staff to run those locations. So you should know from the sell side, if you're thinking about that, what that looks like in a picture. How many people would want to exit with you or not, and how many people would want to stay on or not. Again, it's part of your planning conversations that you can have on an ongoing basis. And again, just good practical knowledge to know your business. What's the facility condition? What's the reputation of the dealership? All those types of quantitative things have an impact on the value of your business. How well are you in CSI, SSI? How well is your Google rating? Things like that to make sure that you've got the best reputation possible. And I like the facility condition one because it's very easy to walk your store from a customer's eyes every day, which is what you should be doing, to make sure it looks clean, presentable, ready for business. That always enhances the value of not only the facility itself, but also your employees, because it adds additional pride in the place they work in and the service they provide. Very a soft factor, but can be a very important and impactful. Some of the key performance indicators we look at, again, these aren't going to be surprises to you. These should be ones that you know for your business inside and out, and you're looking at, the old term, what we monitor improves, what we measure goes up. So these are some of the factors that you should be looking at all the time. Obviously, volume is one component of that. Gross profit is another, right? F&I, finance and insurance, has been a very hot topic over the last 24 months and will continue to be for a long, long time, right? So you want to look at that F&I performance and understand, are you maximizing the opportunity that's on the table? And are you enhancing those opportunities from a go-forward basis? So good opportunities there. Absorption rate looks at the back end of the business and how well we are in our service and parts and after sales. And, I think Doug mentioned earlier how important that side of the business can be to the overall value of the business and also to the overall profitability of the business. So absorption is one of those great indicators to look at. And then return on sales. Return on sales has kind of become our industry benchmark for the way to compare dealers across dealers. And I always explain return on sales as one of those key performance indicators that really everybody in the dealership should know. Everybody in the dealership should understand what that means. And I'll explain to you what I mean just with a quick story, which is, if you look at return on sales as a dollar, so let's say, for example, right now we're at 5.6% nationally, which sounds like a great number. That still means it's 5.6 cents for every dollar we sell. So it's not an incredible number. Some other industries are in the 20s to 30s when you look at software and things like that. So automotive can be very profitable, no doubt about it, because of the volume that we're doing. But we need to also understand that indicator, hey, we work hard for that, right? So every penny and every return on sales, every point of that has a big impact on the value of your business today and the value of your business in the future as well going forward. These are all ones that you should know. Let's talk about some automotive trends in the business. So a little bit about the valuation, how we do that, and hopefully you picked up a couple of tips on ways you can increase the value of your asset already. But let's look at some M&A trends in the world right now. This is United States. So there's been about 187 transactions done through July. That's the latest reporting that we have. Comes out, it gets updated every couple of months as well. So we're going to see that number skyrocket, I think, this year as well. 347 rooftops. So quite a large amount of transactions happening now. What does that look like from a overall perspective. This, I think, is an interesting chart. One of the reasons I joined the firm that I joined, DSMA, high ethical company. There were people that I knew and had done business with and had a great reputation in the business. And what I saw in the 20 groups and the profit forums and the dealers I was talking to is that consolidation was going to continue to happen and needed to happen. It was a little bit of a low ramp. And really that passion for helping entrepreneurs and dealers maximize the value of their asset, whether they're buying it or selling it, and understand how to drive that forward, fuels that consolidation. And so that's why we see about 70% of the transactions have been single store transactions, right? So it's smaller dealers or possibly larger dealers who are ready to exit the business. I'll talk more about why in just a minute, but you can see that's still the largest majority. But the ones you hear about in the news, the really big ones, the 5+, only 1% of the transactions, but those are the ones that make the papers, right? We hear about the consolidations that are happening. RFJ recently, the Phil Long organization. We see all of those types of things, and they hit the newspaper because they're big dollar transactions that are happening as well. But you can still see the vast majority are single rooftop transactions. Talk about some trends around that. So there's two different ways that a transaction happens. This is an educational standpoint, right? One is as a multiple of EBITDA, so a multiple of profits. That's all that means, right? And the multiple can be determined by many of those factors we just talked about in the last poll. What's the brand? Where's the location? What's the volume? And what's the profitability? And even what's the facility status at this point in time? They can all have a big impact on determining what that multiple is. But on the flip side, if we have a dealership that's particularly maybe losing money or break even, it's difficult to apply a multiple to that. The asset still has value because it's a franchise, right? The franchise system in North America and the US automotive franchise system is the greatest franchise system in the world, right? We have a lot of protections at the state level as well as the federal level. And that means that you've got a protected territory, a PMA. That means there's value to that. If I had to start that business up again, it would have expenses incurred to a large amount. So there's value to the asset. So about 31% of our transactions are what we call the Quotas Value Index. Quotas is our information system, our intelligent information where we analyze those 1,100 plus valuations and really look at what's happening among them. So about 31% of those determine what we call a Quotas Value Index value, which means even though the store is not profitable, here's the potential of the store, the brand has an impact, the location has an impact. So here's the value that that asset should bring regardless of the profitability as it currently stands today. So if that makes sense, there's a lot of buyers out there who actually are attracted to those types of opportunities because they see huge potential upside opportunities in those businesses as well. So there's still a lot of value there in that business. Average goodwill's running about 4.86 million right now. We're seeing that trend up. I'd say it was about much lower, about maybe 10 to 20% lower last year. We're definitely in a seller's market from that perspective. So this is a great opportunity and a great time. If you are thinking about an exit strategy, it's a great time to get a valuation done on your business, understand the value, and then possibly take it to market so you can continue to go. All right, David, we're back to a poll. Okay, so this poll, what is the most common reason for selling a dealership? We've got 4 different choices there. Retirement, obviously one, OEM pressure being another, brand alignment or trend and territory, and then profit takers. And I define profit takers as those guys I mentioned earlier who maybe buy an underperforming asset, build the dealership up, get it performing really well, and then look to sell that asset afterwards. So we see that as well. So let's go ahead and publish those results. I think we still got a couple people voting, I think. Oh, I think we're good now, David, if you want to go ahead and publish those results. 63% retirement, 11% realignment, 26% profit takers. Interesting results there. And I think as you see the consolidation, it's going to continue to grow. Retirement is definitely going to be one of those factors as well. That's going to continue to roll. But let's see what our numbers currently look like. So in our experience so far in the transactions, we see about 40% of those opportunities being retirement at this point in time. Funny enough, 46% being realignment. Now that doesn't mean it can't be both realignment and retirement. Sometimes it's both. I want to realign where the dealership is located or the brand. So I make the decision actually that I'm going to exit at the same time because it doesn't make sense. So sometimes you may have multiple factors in one, but those are certainly two factors there. OEM pressure sometimes is a factor, but a very small percentage, and then profit takers. So the top three are, as you guys sussed out on the poll, realignment, retirement, and then those profit takers who are looking for the next opportunity to continue to grow, which is really a great opportunity. Those profit takers are an important part of the business because if you can institutionally fix the business and now it's running and it's profitable and all that, that's a great asset for somebody who's looking for a store that they don't need to repair. Some people aren't specialists or good at that. They're much better at maintaining a performance than they are at fixing and flipping, right? So you've got a couple of different opportunities there in that profit taker. So there's a role for multiple reasons to be able to do that. Everybody's got an opportunity. All right. So blue sky, that's what it's all about, right? Everybody wants to see the blue sky and be able to take that opportunity, maybe take some chips off the table, understand what's happening, and sometimes apply a different lifestyle as well. So those things are important. What's it look like to close a transaction? Right now, obviously 2020, COVID had an impact on that. So from the day you typically sign a listing or an opportunity goes to market till the day it closes is typically 9 months, with most of that from a percentage standpoint being OEM approval, the OEM approval process, which I'll talk a little bit more in just a few minutes. But historically, that's where we see it. The fastest deal we've ever done, 2 months, which is a great opportunity, right? And the longest time we've ever taken so far is about 2 years. And typically that happens for a variety of different reasons that maybe it happens, but typically you don't see that. But on average, this year we're seeing we're back down into that normal 8 to 9 months. 2020 was an anomaly because of the COVID impact, but we're seeing those numbers come back down now as things become more normalized in that side of the business. All right, let's talk about some best practices. Sorry.
Andy, Doug, can you share with me what let me turn my volume down.
Yes, sir, Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, can you share what the average valuation time is? I know you said you've done a number of valuations. What does that look like in preparation for a sale?
Oh, fantastic. Great question. So typically for us, once we have all the documents in hand, it takes about 10 days to turn around a valuation. So, and we go through some questions. We work together to do that, make sure we got the information. Once we have it all in our hands, it's about 10 working days, and we're able to present back what we believe the value of the asset is.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll talk about a few best practices. Some of these are going to be common whether you're on the buyer side or the seller side, but I think they're important things that you consider back to that thank you know concept that I was talking about earlier, which is always important. So let's see if I can get this to flip up. Here you go. When you're buying, it's important from a buyer's perspective, especially if you've never done an acquisition before. It's important for you to do a few things. One is to get expert advice. We're particular one firm. There's many different firms out there, obviously, but we do advisement on either the buyer side or the seller side. I think it's important to delineate here that our ethos and our ethics at DSMA are we only represent one side of a transaction. So we're either representing a buyer or a seller. We don't feel that you can ethically or correctly really serve two masters, right? You have to either represent one side or the other side. You can't serve two masters. So that's my first suggestion in that. But when you look at the due diligence side of the business, you want to make sure that you're looking at things like the receivables, the inventory, right? Especially right now with inventories being a bit lean, maybe it's even easier to do those types of analysis, but not only the vehicle inventory, but the parts inventory and what that looks like. That's part of your due diligence process you want to definitely look at. What other loans are outstanding or intercompany balances so that you understand what's happening from an impact on the financials there, on the balance sheet and how that affects the transaction. And obviously any other debt that the business may have that you may assume. In the US, pretty much 100% of our sales are asset sales. You do hear sometimes share purchases, but for the most part in the US, we're asset sales because it allows us to break clean with the old corporation, start clean with the new corporation, and move forward. So some other things that you want to look at from a due diligence perspective is the employees, right? Who's staying? Who do you think is going to exit the business? What's the quality of the employees? What do you need to do in order to keep that store running? So that's always important to look at the employees and how they are. Real estate and environmental. We are seeing real estate values come back again. I think at the beginning of COVID, there was a little bit of a hiccup for a few months where people were seeing values maybe be impacted to the negative. I think we're now seeing that stabilization happening, especially around the country, depending upon where you are in the country. Certain places, as we all know, in the housing market, as well as in the commercial market, certain markets appraisals are actually going up substantially. So it's good to know that value of the real estate. And then second of all, we are seeing that more and more, because money is relatively inexpensive, there's a lot of purchases that are happening with borrowed dollars. When banks are involved, typically they're going to require an appraisal and an environmental. And what that means is they do what they call a phase one environmental review, which basically looks at the property itself to make sure there's no environmental issues that need to be handled before a transaction can be allowed to sell. So those are just some factors to make sure that you understand as you move forward in your due diligence process. The other things you want to look at, obviously, is evaluating the assets, as we talked about. Other working capital. The fixed assets of the business are important as well. What are you buying? What are you purchasing? What's the condition of those assets as well? All those things are important factors in that part of the purchase. Just making sure that you put your hands on it and understand what's happening with those individual assets. It's the same with the seller. You'll see a lot of these are commonality because if you're preparing your dealership for sale, you also want to know the value of those fixed assets and the condition of those because they're adding value, hopefully, to your transaction as well. Key considerations. Here's what I'd tell you for best practices. Hire for professionals for the area that you need, right? Make sure you got that advice so that it'll save you money and save you time. I often quote it as saying, time kills deals, right? Big factor. Time kills deals. So if you're not using the right professionals to keep deal flow moving and all of that, sometimes things can happen throughout that process that ends up actually the deal falls apart because we weren't able to do it in a timely manner. So I would not use this opportunity to be penny pincher, whether you're on the buyer or the seller side. I would use this opportunity to make sure that you've got a bench of good advisors, right? And you're holding them to timely movement of the transaction forward. Do that with a detailed list, right? You want to have a detailed list of what is the questions that you have so that you can check those items off and work to that checklist instead of just haphazard going from point to point from area to area. Really sit down and design the list that you want and the things that are important to you. Because in every transaction, a buyer or seller is going to have different priorities.
Another question for you, if I can.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, strategic source is on the expense side of the business. And one of the things that we do is help organizations cut costs and improve profitability. How important is that for a dealer, whether they use us or whether they do it themselves or they use somebody else? But how important is it for that dealer to cut costs to maximum extent in terms of valuation of the business going forward? Can you address that?
Absolutely. It's a great point. We get asked all the time, hey, I think I'm going to wait 3 months. I'm going to sell 3 months. I'm going to, increase my profit. That's a short-term vision and a short-term view. So I think the first thing is if you're thinking about selling in 2 to 3 to 4 or 5 years, you definitely want to, regardless, you want to engage somebody like Strategic Source, right? When I ran 20 groups and I tell dealers all the time, you want to maximize your profitability. You're one of those higher professionals. Strategic Source can help you understand those expense categories and where you're missing out. One of my favorite parts of the business was when I was working with dealer principals. One of the reasons they enjoyed being in a 20 group so much was you got to see benchmarked against other people's performance where you can improve and the things you can do to drive that. Well, you guys have a wealth of information at Strategic Source on all those expense items that can help somebody today understand if they're out of line or do they need to address it, right? So you don't want to try to hit everything and just cut all your cost and think you're going to save your way into some giant profit that is going to drive your valuation up. Because that's not always going to happen, right? We've seen sometimes where people cut expenses so much, it impacts CSI, it impacts volume, it impacts other things that actually you're diminishing the value of your asset. So I would start with the valuation. And as part of that valuation, we're going to help you review not only the income categories, but the expense categories so that you have a more intelligent layout of what your current business looks like and the things you could do to drive value. But that doesn't stop you from having the opportunity to say, I'm still going to go to market now, right? As we mentioned, it's a very active market right now. And we'll do an analysis going forward of the additional profit opportunity should a buyer buy that dealership, what additional profitability could be derived, as will that buyer. Most buyers will have this detailed checklist. They'll create their own pro forma of what they believe the business could do, right? So we may be saying that, it's a multiple of 6, but when they do
Stuff
their
that I
math,
have that I don't
based
think is
on-
my, like HR stuff, so you can do with it whatever. Probably like,
Hey, thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So hope that helps. And then obviously be mindful of timelines and be aware of everyone involved, right? A transaction can be a very emotional thing. So you want to make sure that, you're aware of everyone involved and how to handle those conversations. All right, my key recommendations, they're pretty easy and straightforward. Involve your trusted partners. There's no silly questions, right? This isn't a time to have an ego. If you're making a large purchase or a large sale, you want to make sure that you ask all the questions, no matter how silly you might think they sound. Don't sweat the small stuff. Make sure you're still focused on the big picture. You're going to, win some battles or possibly lose some battles. That's the way that's the way everything always falls out in any negotiation or any life experience that you have. So don't get too mired down in the details that you lose the big picture of what you're trying to accomplish, whether you're on the buyer side or the seller side. And be involved. Be involved. Don't let other people drive the entire transaction. For example, your lawyers or accountants make decisions for you because they don't have the life experience or the goals or understand the goals that you're trying to achieve, right? So the value that you put in the asset in your mind may be bigger than just the number on the paper. So make sure you've considered those factors as well, and you're the owner and the drive of the process. All right, let's think about on the sell side now. Doug, any other questions there?
Good. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the sell side. So if you're thinking of selling, I love this one. It now takes much less energy to come up with a new idea. If you're thinking about selling, there's some similar type things to talk about and to think about as you're doing that. First thing is do your homework. Confidentiality is the number one thing that we hear and that we provide and work with our clients on, right? So make sure that if you're thinking about selling, anybody that you talk to, whether you're talking to me as a broker of possibly representing your dealership for sale, that they lead with confidentiality, right? Our organization, for example, before we talk to anyone about any assets, especially a buyer or a prospective buyer, we sign an NDA, so a non-disclosure agreement that is binding and enforceable. So you want to make sure that, that's always the big consideration a lot of people have for, hey, I don't want it to get out. So confidentiality is important. Make sure that you've got it in your mind and how you're going to drive that forward and work with people that you believe are going to maintain that same level of confidentiality that you would expect and want in your business. Big. Trust the experts. We talked about that again. This one's big for me every day, right? Whether you're selling today or you're just trying to increase profitability tomorrow, or you're not going to sell for 20 years, walk your dealership just like you do walk your used vehicle line or you recondition your used vehicle. Walk your dealership as if you were a customer in a customer's eyes. Look at it from that perspective. Is it the brand? Is it the representation that you want at your dealership? So make sure you do that. Read your dealer agreement. Know your rights for your particular state. And then also whether or not things like, does the OEM in your particular area have a right of first refusal? Things like that. You want to understand some of that. And again, there's experts that can help you understand that agreement. And And so you just want to make sure you've got that kind of understood before you walk in. So back to you think or do you know? It's a good thing to be prepared through the process. Now you've got time from saying, hey, Andy, I want to do evaluations to listing to work together with us to put together these types of things. So you don't have to feel like you have to do all this before you pick up a phone, but it is something that we're going to challenge you on, and you want to make sure that you have the best interest so you understand what's happening there. Same thing with employees. Make sure and these are big, good best practices every day to increase your profitability. Make sure you understand that. Ask yourself the hard question. If you do sell, what are you going to do tomorrow? Right? A lot of people don't have a plan. They get to the end and they're like, oh, what was I thinking? Right? But think about that. Envision what that looks like and what your life might be after that and what you want to do. As I mentioned earlier, we've had 8 people we've worked with to sell their dealerships come join our organization. So there is an opportunity if you want to continue to work. There's other opportunities and areas. So just have that thought process happening a little bit so that you can really consider where your options are. Best practices, same thing as really the last one, right? Work with a detailed list, work with professionals. Timelines are important. Make sure you're aware of everyone involved and how do you keep them all pushing forward towards the goal and objective of completing a transaction. Same recommendations here as well. Seek advice and be involved, right? You're the master of this thing. You're the important component of it. Whether or not you're the CEO, the CFO, the dealer principal, if you're involved in that organization and you're part of the transaction, be involved. Make sure you're part of the transaction to help it give the best possible outcome. So that's everything on the best practice side. Let's talk a little bit about the future. I know this is a big thing everybody asks me about all the time. What are the challenges over the next 10 years? So I just threw a few up here to talk through with our last remaining minutes, if you will. Whoops, let me go back. Rise of the dealer group. What we meant by that, and you saw it earlier, is the consolidation. So my belief and one of the passions I have in this business is entrepreneurs, right? So I think we're going to continue to see the 1 to 3 rooftop dealerships possibly be rolled into larger groups. So 10 to 20. We'll see a lot of those medium dealer groups become bigger and bigger. So it's not just the publics that are increasing in size. It's also some of these hometown dealers or regional dealer groups that are going to continue to expand and consolidate. Economy always has an impact, right? Interest rates always have an impact. Shared mobility, less of an impact. I put that up there because a lot of people ask me about that, but ride share and things like that, I don't think post-COVID are as scary as we thought. Your best PPE really is your vehicle. So we're seeing almost a comeback of the vehicle in that regard. Autonomous driving, much the same. Electrification, I'll talk about more in a minute. And then agency sales model, which really means in other countries we're seeing this, which is basically kind of the Tesla model or possibly a dealer network that delivers vehicles but doesn't actually retail them. So the franchise values could be affected through that. Those are some of the challenges that we're seeing come through in the next few years from an opportunity and also from a what's going to happen. We just don't know some of that, right? We're going to continue to predict. I talked about this one earlier. This is the poll. We got one more poll. What is the average age of a unit in operation in the U.S. market? And this, I think, has to do with the future of the business as well, right? So it's a hot topic. Everybody's talking about what's going to happen with EVs, what's going to happen with this, what's going to happen with the opportunities in the marketplace today. So we'll see if we get a couple more answers here. Everybody's voting in. So far, 7 is the winner, with 11 and 15 coming up behind it. All right, let's go and lock it in there just in the interest of time. So 7 years got 46%, 11 years got 31, 15 got 23. So 11 years is the answer to that, and aging. So what we are seeing is that, listen, you know, the demise of the car dealer is vastly overstated, right? I think Mark Twain said the reporting my death is wildly exaggerated. And that's what we're talking about, right? So UIOs are continuing to grow. Vehicles out there in the place will continue to grow and continue to age. People will continue to need work on those. Obviously, there's going to be an impact and changes, but I think it's much slower than some people are currently predicting in the world. So, but it's something to be aware of and to continue to look at. Let's talk about EVs for a second. This is the big one that's hot, so I just want to touch on this in a minute. When you look at the market cap, this is the important one for me. So this is the market cap of just a variety of different ones. If you look at Tesla, for example, the market cap's over $1 billion. We all know that. Rivian, which just IPO'd a little over a month ago, I think it was, $140 million valuation. Lucid, quite a strong valuation. Toyota, right? And then the traditionals. The interesting part is when you map this, Tesla is only the 16th largest from a volume perspective OEM in the country, but yet they have the value greater than all the others combined. Rivian and Lucid haven't even sold a car yet, and the valuations are huge in that area. So these guys are coming to market. When you look at the OEMs, the major OEMs market cap is lower than Lucid. How weird is that, right? That Ford would have a same or lower market cap than a brand that hasn't even sold a vehicle yet. Obviously, there's some excitement around that. Some of these companies are going to stay. Some of these companies are going to succeed or fail over the next few years. But the question is, right now, when you look at the value of the franchise system, it's almost undervalued, right? Because we've got that opportunity. When you add up all the market caps of the ones that I was showing on the previous slide, they still don't add up to Tesla by itself. But yet their vehicle sales show out way higher. So we're seeing two distinct strategies really come forward in the EV market. One, the Tesla, where they're all electric 100%. And then really Ford with a slightly different approach where, you know, one of the visions they have is models. So you might have a Ford F-150, you might have a gas version, a diesel version, and an electric version. So we're seeing a couple of different distinct categories. All of that still needs to fall out. It's a very evolving marketplace, but it's interesting to see the gap in the current market value, market cap, and then also what's happening versus their annual sales. Because look at this chart here, Toyota's annual sales versus their market cap, Ford's annual sales versus their market cap, and Tesla's annual sales versus their market cap. So again, I'm not an economist to hear and tell you what the stock valuation, are they over or undervalued? But certainly it looks like there's lots of opportunity there and lots of value to be found throughout that curve. Big thing here, though, is everybody's coming to the party. So we know it's going to happen. That's that fear of the uncertainty and the unknown. Now we've got a lot more knowns than we did even 12 months ago. And if you look at it, the next generation of automakers are investing over $500 billion, right, by 2030. Some are going 50% EV. For example, VW has stated that, obviously Tesla. And then you've got Ford 40 to 50%, Toyota 70%. So you've got a variety of different approaches. Don't know which ones are going to win and which ones are going to lose at this point, or if everybody's going to be able to all boats rising. But we are seeing if a manufacturer has an EV strategy and how strong that strategy is, can actually have an impact on the value of that brand in the marketplace today. So it's going to be a topic that's going to continue to be on the radar. The good news is whatever changes are coming, dealers are still going to be at the center of it, right? I think if I go back to the 1990s and look at some of the reports that were coming out now, franchise system is going to be gone. You talk about all that stuff. And I think we've come to the realization over the last 50 years that the franchise system is strong, it's robust, and it's able to survive, for lack of a better word, attacks from outside industry. So franchises are going to be strong. There's some uncertainty. We have to figure that out. But the value of the franchise will continue to be in the North American market. I think with that, Doug, I'm going to open it up to questions. So I got a couple of questions already. What is the number one question, number one tip you would give to improve dealer profitability? Well, that's a great question. I've been asked that question a billion times. And the example the tip that I give might surprise you, actually. My number one tip, if you want to improve the profitability in your dealership starting tomorrow, is have a manager's meeting. Get together in a room with your managers. If you're a dealer principal, a general manager, whatever it may be, get together in a room and talk about the business. Go back to those KPIs I put up. I think it was early in the deck that said, these are the 5 or 6 that you really want to know and talk about. Throw those up in the wall, look how you compare to other people, and then talk to your managers about how you're going to drive that and improve that. Make that managers meeting a routine, certainly once a week, right? And then expand out from there. So that would be my number 1 profitability tip. Second question, should I get a property appraisal before bringing my dealership to market? Another great question. It's not a have to do, but it's certainly something that, again, back to that, do you think or do you know? So I would engage, for example, if you were thinking about it and you want to get a valuation of the dealership, you could start that process, get an appraisal as well. Right now, the average appraisal is taking 4 to 5 weeks to get scheduled and done. So don't let it hold you back, because there'll be time and things you can be doing to get ready for the sale without having the appraisal in your hand. So I'd say that. Other questions? Oh, how does DSMA see EVs affecting valuations in the future? Yeah, I think I kind of answered part of that earlier, which is going to be, depends on the brand. I do think that as EV strategies come out and different strategies and different brands have different approaches, like on that slide previous, that they will start to have an impact on the valuation based on how fast they're coming to market, what kind of investment it's required, not only on the manufacturer side, but also on the dealer side, right? So what are the facility improvements that are going to be required in order to make yourself available and able to sell EV vehicles at your dealership? They can sometimes be substantial. So I think that will have an impact on valuations possibly in the future as well. All right, Doug, anything else, any other questions from your side?
Yeah, I think you've done an outstanding job. I think what we have all taken away from this is that the industry is changing. It is consolidating rapidly, and it's whether you are in the market to buy or sell, it probably makes sense to have a valuation done. Is that a fair statement? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
No, any closing comments, Andy, and we'll wrap it up, and I'll close it out before David takes it over.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say to that, because you brought up a good point, even if you're thinking about buying and you're like, why do I need a valuation if I'm buying? We have several clients that we've done valuations for when they're thinking about buying, that they can then take that valuation to the bank when they're looking to secure funding for an acquisition. So instead of going into their own pocket possibly for an acquisition, they can work with a bank. So having an updated value of your business allows you more leverage when securing financing to make an acquisition. So still a great idea, even if you're in the buying mode, to get a valuation on your asset for sure.
Andy, I see one question came in also. Additionally, do you see valuations in Canada following the same trends as the U.S.?
You know what? Great question. Canada is a market that we work in a lot. I would say the answer is predominantly yes. I will say we see slight differences. We see sometimes higher multiples depending upon the brand there, because the franchise laws are a little different in that country than in the U.S. market. So, but I would say by and large, we expect similar trends in both countries. Anything else?
Can you advance that last slide for me, please?
Absolutely. Oh.
All right. Well, so for everybody attending today, we certainly thank you for your attendance. I think, as I was mentioning to Andy before we jumped on here today, this appears to be one of the best webinars in terms of registrations. And as I saw earlier, for attendance as well. It's a hot topic. And Andy did a masterful job of providing not only buy-sell advice, but updates from your perspective on the industry as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time and expertise today. If you'd like a copy of this webinar presentation, there's a couple of ways you can do that. One is to email us at sales@strategicsource.com, which is on your screen. The other opportunity is just text us 612-386-3898, and we can get a copy of it to you. The third way is that we should have this on our website by tomorrow, and as well as all other previous webinars that will be on our website. So there's three ways to get it: email, text us, check the website. We're happy to send this webinar to you for your listening pleasure at another time. Andy, thanks again for your time today. If any of you folks out there are interested in taking a look at your expense structure, there's about 130 expense categories that my team works pretty consistently. And if you want to get your dealership in a position to increase that EBITDA and increase your valuation, we might be able to help you. On the other hand, if you are acquiring somebody that you know needs to be leveraged and improved, we can help you there too. So thanks very much. I'll turn it over to Dave.
Let me just add my thank you very much for everybody's time and attention. I really appreciate it. I know sometimes webinars are tough to stay on, so I appreciate you and everything you do.
We have a post-session survey for the group. Let's bring that up. We'd love to get your feedback on the time today. That would be of great help to us since you spent an hour with us. We love to make it worthwhile, worth your time. And so whatever you share helps us to improve in the future. So there we have it. We'll leave this up as we get ready to conclude. Thanks everyone for your time today. Andy, Doug, everyone, and we look forward to you joining us on future webinars with Strategic Source. Thanks everyone, and have a great rest of the week.